Greetings dear students, I am Pretima Sharma, your bio teacher. Today we shall start with the topic respiration. Dear students, in the topic nutrition, we studied that autotrophs prepare food in the form of glucose. This glucose is taken up by heterotrophs, that is digested, broken down into simpler forms, and these simpler forms reach the cells where these simpler forms are to be oxidized and converted to energy. As we all know that we eat food to get energy. So, respiration can be defined as a biochemical process which involves breakdown of glucose with a subsequent release of energy inside the cells and then elimination of the waste products from the body. Like nutrition, respiration is also a stepwise process. But before that, let us know about the types of respirations. On the basis of the availability of oxygen for breaking down of glucose, respiration is categorized into two types, aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. See, from the name itself we can make out aerobic means air is there, anaerobic no air is there. That means oxygen, right? Okay. The second point of difference between both are aerobic respiration. In aerobic respiration, a complete breakdown of food occurs, whereas in anaerobic respiration, only partial breakdown of food takes place. In aerobic respiration, the end products are carbon dioxide and water, whereas in anaerobic respiration, the end products, it can be ethanol or carbon dioxide and lactic acid, etc. In aerobic respiration, there is considerable amount of energy which is produced. That means a large amount of energy is produced. Whereas in anaerobic respiration, a very less amount of energy is produced. Now, let's get back to the stepwise breakdown of food in the cell. In the first cell, the glucose molecule, which is 6-carbon molecule, is broken down into 2 pyruvate molecules, that is 3-carbon molecules, by the process called glycolysis. The process occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell and it does not need any presence of oxygen, right? Now, further breakdown of pyruvate molecules now depends upon the availability of oxygen. So, we have 3 conditions: if oxygen is present, if oxygen is absent, or oxygen is in scarce amount, right? So, first let us consider the situation when we have ample amount of oxygen. Now, if sufficient oxygen is available, each pyruvate molecule enters the mitochondria, where it is completely oxidized to produce carbon dioxide, water, and 38 molecules of ATP, that is the energy molecules, right? Now, the second condition, when there is no oxygen available, the pyruvate does not enter the mitochondria, it remains in the cytoplasm only, okay? But is converted into ethyl alcohol. Now, ethyl alcohol is 2-carbon molecule, okay? Now, sometimes when we are doing vigorous physical exercise or hard physical work, the oxygen which is used up is very fast in our muscle cells than it is received from the blood. Then, in the absence of oxygen or in the scarcity of oxygen, anaerobic respiration takes place in our muscle cells to release energy. Now, during this process, the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, that is 3-carbon molecule in the scarcity of oxygen. Now, in both these two cases, that is in the absence of oxygen and in the scarcity of oxygen, only 2 molecules of ATP are released. Okay, that means in anaerobic respiration, less amount of energy is released. Now, during the last one, that is when the lactic acid is produced, right? There are sudden buildup of lactic acid in our muscles which leads to muscle cramps. After the exercises we feel a lot of pain in the muscles, right? Now it is because of the formation of lactic acid in our muscle cells. As in the topic nutrition, we discussed what is nutrition, type of nutrition, nutrition in plants, nutrition in small animals, that is the lower animals, and then nutrition in human beings. The same pattern we shall be discussing in all the life processes, that is in respiration, what is respiration, types of respiration, respiration in plants, respiration in animals, that is lower animals, and then the higher animals. Similar would be the pattern we'll be discussing in transportation of materials, right? And the same in excretory systems as well. The next topic now we'll be discussing is respiration in plants. The plants also respire by taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. Thus, oxygen and carbon dioxide are called the respiratory gases. As plants have a branching shape, that is a large surface area as compared to their volume, so the oxygen need can be satisfied by diffusion. Thus, diffusion occurs in roots, stems and leaves. The air present between the particles of the soil, the roots of the plant take the oxygen required for respiration from the air present between the soil particles by the process of diffusion, right? And the oxygen from the air which is present in the soil particles diffuses into the root hair and thus reaches the cell for respiration. Now the respiration in stem, how does it take place? The stems, as we all know, for small herbaceous plants, their stems have stomata in them. Whereas the hard and woody stems of large plants, trees, they have lenticels in them. Now lenticel is a small area of bark which you can see in the picture, right? The second picture. Lenticel is a small area of bark in a woody stem where the cells are loosely packed, allowing the gaseous exchange to take place. Now the respiration through stomata, that is mainly in leaves, okay? The leaves of the plants have tiny pores which are called stomata. Now we all know stomata is the opening, right, which is guarded by guard cells. The exchange of respiratory gases in the leaves take place by the process of diffusion through stomata. Okay. Now it should be noted that respiration in leaves occur during the daytime as well as at night. Now on the other hand, photosynthesis only occurs during the daytime. Why? Because it needs sunlight, right? So the net gaseous exchange in the leaves of the plant is during the day, oxygen diffuses out and carbon dioxide diffuses in. Why do carbon dioxide diffuse in? For the process of photosynthesis, right? Okay. And during night, oxygen diffuses in and carbon dioxide diffuses out. Okay. Now, how does that opening and closing of stomata, respiration is taking place through stomata. Okay, fine. But how does that, how is it guarded? The opening and closing of stomata depends actually upon the turgor pressure of the guard cells, right? What is turgor pressure? When water gets inside the guard cells, there is turgor pressure which is increased there, okay? And thus they expand, which results in the stomatal pore opening. This we have already discussed and I have very nicely explained you in the lower classes, if you remember, right? Now, when these guard cells lose water, the turgor pressure inside the guard cells decreases. This results in closing of the stomatal pores, right? Both oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse through the plasma membrane of the cells. The next subtopic is respiration in animals. Different animals have different modes of respiration. For example, small unicellular animals like amoeba, respiration takes place by simple diffusion of gases through the cell membrane, right? Because it's unicellular, it doesn't have any organ, right? The animals like earthworms, which live in the soil, use their skin to absorb the oxygen from the air, right? And remove carbon dioxide. The aquatic animals like fishes, prawns, mussels have gills as the respiratory organs. In insects like grasshopper, cockroaches, houseflies, they have tiny holes which are called spiracles on their body and the air tubes called trachea. The respiratory organs of the land animals such as human beings, lizards, are the lungs. Now all these respiratory organs, that is the skin, gills, trachea and lungs, these all have some common features. The common features are, the first one is they have a large surface area to get enough oxygen, right? The second one is they have thin walls for easy diffusion of the gases, right? And the third and the main one is they have a very rich supply of the transporting respiratory gases. In humans, respiration involves two steps, breathing and cellular respiration. Breathing, which is also called external respiration, involves taking in of air containing oxygen and giving out of the air. Simply intake and giving out of the air is related with breathing, which is simply a physical process, right? And the cellular respiration, which is also termed as internal respiration, which involves release of energy by oxidation of food. That is what we learnt in the definition of respiration. The respiratory system in human beings include the nostril, the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveolar sacs or the alveoli and the lungs. The nostril cavity. The inner surface of the nasal passage is lined by fine hairy ciliated epithelium and mucus secreting cells. The entry of microbes and dust particles in the respiratory passage is checked by both cilia and the mucus which is present in the nasal cavity. Mucus and the rich blood supply inside the nasal passage make the inhaled air moist and warm. The next organ, the next part of the respiratory tract is the pharynx. From the nasal cavity, the air moves into the pharynx, which is a common area to both digestive and the respiratory tracts. The pharynx opens into the larynx, which is also termed as the voice box. Okay, larynx is also termed as the voice box, which leads to trachea. And trachea, which is connected to the esophagus or the food pipe, leads further into the leads into the digestive system. A cartilaginous flap called epiglottis guards the entrance to trachea. Now, when we swallow some food or drink water, the epiglottis covers the trachea to prevent food or water from entering the respiratory tract. The trachea, which is termed as the windpipe, extends to the thoracic cavity. Its wall is provided with incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now, what is the function of these rings? Why are the rings there? These rings keep the trachea in dilated position and it prevents it from collapsing. At the lower end, the trachea splits into two primary bronchi, which extends separately into the lobes of the right lung. Now, within the lungs, each bronchus is divided many times into the bronchioles. Each bronchiole terminates in a sac called alveolar sac. Alveoli are the actual sites of respiratory exchange. Hence, these are called functional units of lungs. The lungs are covered by two membranes which are called the pleural membranes. Now, the breathing mechanism. This is what was the structure of the respiratory tract. Right? Now, the breathing mechanism. Breathing, which ventilates the lungs, has a cyclic pattern. Air flows in and out of the lungs by alternative expansion and contraction of the thoracic cavity. Breathing involves the movement of the ribcage and the diaphragm. Breathing is also a stepwise process. It has two steps, inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation means breathing in and exhalation means breathing out. Inhalation is always an active, energy requiring process. in which contraction of the intercostal and the diaphragm muscles take place. This produces a forward and the outward movement of the rib cage, which results in an increase in the volume of the chest cavity. As the lungs expand, the air pressure in them reduces, and so the air rushes into and from the atmosphere through the air passages. And what happens in exhalation? Exhalation is breathing out, right? And it is a passive process. In this, relaxation of the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm muscles take place. This produces a downward and inward movement of the rib cage, which results in the decrease in the volume of the thoracic cavity or the chest cavity. As a result, the lungs come to its original size. The air pressure in them increases, leading to rush out of the air into the atmosphere through the air passages. Now, this is what was the mechanism of breathing. Inhaling, breathing in, and exhaling, breathing out. Fine. Now, breathing in and breathing out is done. Now, how does this exchange of gases take place? During breathing in, the air containing oxygen fills up the alveoli of the lungs. The alveoli are surrounded by very thin blood capillaries carrying rich supply of the blood. The concentration of oxygen in alveoli is higher than it is in the deoxygenated blood in the capillaries. This difference causes oxygen to diffuse from the alveoli into the lung capillaries. The oxygen is carried by the red colored pigment in our blood, which is called the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin binds the oxygen and takes it to all the parts of the body. Now, during each breathing cycle, the lungs always contain some air so that there is sufficient time for the oxygen to be absorbed, for the carbon dioxide to be released. This is called the residual volume. Now, this is what we have for respiration. Thank you. Stay blessed.